I'll cheat and put it on pre-fade. So theoretically, you should hear me, even though nobody in the room.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nathan Cooper. I'm the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. I ask that you'll remain standing for the entrance of Her Honor, the Honorable, the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta. Please be seated. Well, good afternoon. It is so great to see so many of you here today. As I mentioned, my name is Nathan Cooper. I'm the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, and I would like to welcome you to our annual Black Ribbon Ceremony. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the platform party today. We have a number of very esteemed and valuable guests. I'd like to welcome Your Honor, the Honorable Salma Lahani, Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, the Honorable Ron Orr, the MLA for Lacombe-Panoka and the Minister of Culture, the Honorable Darren Billis, MLA for Edmonton-Beverly-Clareview, Mr. John Shumlis, the Honorary Consul for Poland in Edmonton, Mr. Alexander Danilenko, Consul General of Ukraine in Edmonton, Rabbi Ari of Shabbat in Edmonton, Mr. Andrei Makarevich, the first Vice President of the Canadian Polish Council of Alberta Society, Ms. Urishia Boychuk, President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Alberta Provincial Council, Mr. Joel Zelkle, President of the Western Canadian Zelkle Society, Mr. Erwin Kilota, a member of the Canadian Lithuanian Society in Edmonton, Father Reverend Thomas Kobit, the pastor of St. Basil's Ukrainian Catholic Parish. I'd also like to welcome our talented violinist, who would have thought that violinist would have been the trickiest word to say in these introductions? Our talented violinist, Tatiana Wyszynski, and also recognize a couple of guests who are in our audience today who were very influential in the organization of today's Black Ribbon Ceremony. Therese Schlumpfriga, one of the community organizers, and I'd also like to welcome the president of the Canadian-Hungarian Association, Mr. Laszlo Zabut. Welcome, everyone. I also see a number of members of the Legislative Assembly who have joined us today. I see the Honorable, the Minister Jackie Armstrong-Hominick, Lauren Dack, Member Shepherd, Member Lowen. Thank you all for your attendance here today, and if I have missed anyone, please accept my deepest apologies. Oh, and Minister Madhu, my apologies there. You get your own special apology. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was an agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union that brought devastation and resulted in the deportation and the death of thousands of people. Ultimately, the agreement led to the Second World War. When refugees fled to Canadian shores for a promise of a better life, thousands of them settled right here in Alberta. Many living in this province today are descendants of the courageous survivors. Today, we gather to commemorate Black Ribbon Day, a day of remembrance for the victims of Stalinism and Nazism. In Canada and in Alberta, we respect the principles of equal rights, self-determination for all people. We understand unequivocally that human rights everywhere are diminished when the rights of one person are threatened. And as we remember those who endured the atrocities at the hands of Stalin and Hitler in the 1939, we are ever mindful of the Russian aggression against our friends and all of humankind, and in particular those in Ukraine. We have a number of very wonderful folks joining us today, and so I'd like to leave the majority of the remarks to those individuals, and so it's my great pleasure to invite our special guest, Her Honor, the Honorable Salma Lahani, Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, to the podium to bring her remarks.
Thank you so much, Speaker Cooper, and thank you for hosting this ceremony today. Elected officials, all our dignitaries, and all of you, our distinguished guests, hello, good afternoon, and thank you for coming out today to remember the victims of Nazism and Stalinism and to stand together against tyranny in all its forms. To begin, and in the spirit of meaningful reconciliation, I would like to recognize and acknowledge all our First Peoples who have called this place home for thousands of years and who welcomed us here to make our own lives. May we always dwell together on these lands with peace, respect, and understanding. I would also like to offer my heartfelt thanks to those among us who work to foster inclusion, compassion, and equality for all people here at home and around the world. As you know, the extreme hatred and prejudice that led to the unfathomable loss of untold millions during the Second World War and Cold War did not end with those conflicts. My own family experienced the terrifying reality of totalitarian rule when 50,000 Asians, and my family was amongst them, were expelled from our native Uganda in the early 1970s simply because of who we were. And there have been far too many other examples of similar violence around the globe. And about Uganda, some of you might know that this year marks the 50th anniversary of the expulsion of all South Asians from Uganda. So my husband and I arrived here to Canada, to Alberta, 45 years ago this year. We arrived here as stateless people because we were expelled from the only country that we knew as home. In the face of this reality, and as long as there is hatred in the world, we have only one choice. We must continue devoting our energies and abilities to countering negative forces with education, with determination, and with a steadfast commitment to fostering peace, freedom, and civil society. I choose to put my faith in the strength, beauty, and compassion that sits at the heart of the human spirit, and I am also inspired by the wisdom of leaders like the late Desmond Tutu, who once said, quote, "All of our humanity is dependent upon recognizing the humanity in others," unquote. I believe the precious gift that is our common humanity grows a little stronger every time we find a way to break through a barrier to understanding, whenever we actively choose to share our best with the world, and with each step we take to protect the right of all people to do the same. As Her Majesty the Queen's representative in Alberta, I would like to recognize and thank the Consular Corps and community leaders here today for your tireless dedication to this essential work. May the victims we honor through this ceremony rest in peace, and may we never falter in our shared devotion to creating a better world today and always. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. It is our great pleasure to have you here this afternoon. I would now like to invite the Honorable Ron Orr to bring remarks on behalf of the Premier of Alberta.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for that. And Your Honor, I want to recognize you as well as all of the representatives, actually, from many of the countries here today of Eastern Europe who experienced much of the brutality and the oppression of both communism and Nazism at a period of time when the world was truly in conflict and in turmoil. And, you know, quite frankly, I also want to recognize the people across Alberta, wherever you come from, the people from across the world who have experienced tyranny and oppression in whatever their country and whatever the historical reasons are. I just want to recognize you. And thank you to everyone who has come here today, and also those who may be watching from home, helping us to honor and remember the victims of communism and Nazism in Europe. Generations of people suffered under these oppressive regimes. Looking back, the cruelty, the inhumanity is almost unimaginable to us. Starvation, poverty, violence forced people to flee from their homes, from their loved ones, from all that they had, and forced them into unimaginable situations. It left families broken, communities destroyed, people adrift for the rest of their lives. Some might prefer to forget the pain of it all, but reflecting on this history, this tragedy, and the loved ones that we have lost, while it is painful, it is also very important. It helps us to heal and to learn and hopefully to grow. And it renews our commitment to stand up against corruption, hatred, and intolerance in any place and any time. But these are the things that so marked those periods of history, and we do not want to repeat them. In Alberta, we're unbelievably fortunate to live in one of the freest, most prosperous places in the world. We must never forget that. However, we also can't take any of that for granted. The price of freedom truly is eternal vigilance. Many people continue around the world to live in fear under dictatorships and authoritarian governments, something that we know nothing about here really in Canada. We have a responsibility to help those in need protect themselves and rebuild their lives that they have lost. It is good that Albertans have come together to support Ukrainian refugees most recently, who bore the brunt of the cruelest Soviet policies in the past and have once again been plunged into terror. Today, on Black Ribbon Day and every day, we must continue to work to resist evil and keep alive the memory of those we have lost, and stand together across the world to oppose psychopathic rulers who have dominated world history for far too long. So thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering, and may we never enter those kinds of dark days again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Orr. One of the great pleasures of being the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta is the opportunity to host such events as Black Ribbon Day or other events that take place here in the Legislative Rotunda. And it is a great honor because it is an opportunity for all members of the Legislative Assembly to come together around common cause, common vision, and common goals. And so it is in that spirit that I invite the Honorable Darren Billis to speak on behalf of of Her Majesty's loyal opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Her Honor, Minister, Consul General, all of our guests, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Slava Isusu Christu. Good afternoon. I'm humbled to mark Black Ribbon Day with all of you and share remarks on behalf of the official opposition. On this solemn day, we find strength in our shared belief that the right to respect and human dignity is inherent to all people and must be protected. We acknowledge this truth through the observance of Black Ribbon Day each year. We also recognize that the disregard for human rights leads to victimization and oppression on a massive scale. In 1939, millions of people lost their lives and suffered countless other atrocities due to a pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union under Stalin's rule. The pact divided countries in Central and Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Canada became a haven for refugees, and Alberta a benefactor of the strength, resiliency, and ingenuity of its newcomers. Today we pay tribute to those who have suffered at the hands of these and other totalitarian governments. I'm grateful to the organizations and the individuals that have brought us here together today. Your efforts remind us that if we want to live in a world of freedom, justice, and peace, we must continually face and defeat oppression in all of its forms. We must be united in our commitment to speak out against tyranny and stand up for human rights. Vichnaya pamyat.
Thank you very much, Member Billis. We're honored to have a number of pre-recorded video messages that have been provided for us today for us to share in. They will come in the following order. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Latvia, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Poland, and third, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Hungary. And we will watch all three videos in succession.
And the government, dear community members and attendees. It took more than 50 years for Central Europe to rid of political consequences of the Soviet and Nazi Pact of 1939. Thereafter, European integration was viewed as peace and security project by Latvia and other Central and Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, but not by our neighbor Russia. Today, history is back in Europe. Yet again, yet another unprovoked, unjustifiable and brutal war is raging in Europe. War at whim, blatant violation of international humanitarian law, once again renders millions of Ukrainians victims of authoritarian regime of Russia. Therefore, this year Black Ribbon Day is not just about remembrance. We are challenged and we are morally obliged to act. This year, Black Ribbon Day is about taking stands against barbaric war of aggression by Russia. This year, it is about continuous and united support of Ukraine by political, economic, military, technical, and other means. We must not allow aggressor to prevail. We cannot afford Ukraine to fail. And yes, Ukraine must and will win with our collective support. Slava Ukraini!
Mr. Speaker, Excellencies, members of diplomatic missions, members of the House of Commons, members of the Legislative Assembly, distinguished members of ethnic communities in Canada, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Szanowni Państwo. This year marks the 83rd anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. With this in mind, nations around the world joined in meaningful reflection on the pain and suffering endured by millions of people under two totalitarian regimes, German Nazi and Soviet Communist. Communities across Poland, Baltic states, Europe, Canada, and all over the world take part in events to mark the Black Ribbon Day. Ladies and gentlemen, as we commemorate the past atrocities, we like to repeat the phrase "never again." This phrase that reminds us of genocides, war crimes, crimes against humanity, destruction of cities, acts that we would never like to be repeated. Yet we observe another war in Europe, the Russian barbaric aggression on Ukraine. Poland helps extensively through deliveries of humanitarian and military means, by work in international fora, and above all, by sheltering millions of Ukrainian women and children who escaped from the atrocities of Putin's war. We do this for we remember our history. Mr. Speaker, dear friends, demons of the 20th century are being awakened by Russia today. Nationalism, colonialism, imperialism. This is why we acknowledge the importance of the Black Ribbon Day. This is why today Poland, Canada, the Western world continue their unwavering support for Ukraine. We cannot, we do not want to, and we will not allow for the evil to triumph. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to speak at the Black Ribbon Day commemoration, and I would like to thank the President of the Canadian-Hungarian Heritage Council and Regional President of the Hungarian Diaspora Council, Mrs. Anna Szente, for this opportunity. On August 23rd, in 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union entered into a pact that paved the way to the Second World War, bringing devastation and suffering to millions of people. On this day, we commemorate the victims of two brutal dictatorships of the 20th century. Hungary, just as many European countries, was tragically affected by the destruction of both of these totalitarian regimes. Men, women, and children were murdered, imprisoned, tortured, deported, and deprived of their human rights and dignity. Their properties were confiscated, their culture, faith, and values suppressed. It is important that we remember the victims, as well as learn the lessons of the brutality of Nazism and communism. It is also important to pay tribute to those brave heroes who tried to help, often risking their own lives in those darkest chapters of history. Millions of Canadians of Central and Eastern European descent, whose families were directly affected by Nazi or communist crimes, have found a new home in Canada and appreciated Canada's embrace. They have also contributed to its cultural, economic, and social development. I am grateful for the opportunity to remember the victims of Nazism and communism jointly with our Central and Eastern European compatriots in Canada. I am also proud to say that Hungary has been Canada's NATO ally for nearly a quarter of a century. Black Ribbon Day is a memento, reminding all of us of the importance of protecting democracy and freedom, and to educate future generations about the devastation that Nazism and communism brought on millions of people. Because we cannot take democracy and freedom for granted. Russia's ongoing aggression in Ukraine underscores that. We should always stand up for the truth and reject extremism, intolerance, and oppression. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Members of community groups or community leaders in their own right. You know, it's been said that we should never underestimate the power of a few well-meaning individuals to do good. And we should never overestimate the power of government. And many of these community leaders do just that. They do good in their own communities. And so it's my great pleasure to invite a number of them to bring remarks today. I'd now like to invite John Shumlis, the Honorary Consul for the Republic of Poland in Edmonton, to bring his remarks.
Your Honor, it's always a delight to be in your presence. Mr. Speaker, special guests all, thank you for taking a few minutes of your time to attend our event this afternoon. You know, for the past decade, a number of us have organized this event to draw attention to the hideous crimes against humanity that totalitarian regimes have inflicted upon innocent individuals. Sadly, on the 24th day of February of this year, one of the signature countries of that infamous so-called non-aggression pact has again moved to wage war to expand their mistaken territorial lust. Since that day, we've all witnessed the mass murder of thousands of innocent civilians, children, women, elderly, who are being murdered for no reason whatsoever. I ask myself, why is it that we as humans are not able to solve problems with words, but only with bombs and bullets? On behalf of the sponsoring honorary consuls representing Latvia, Hungary, and Poland, we're honored that you would come and pause and reflect on the event that 83 years ago, 8 days later, saw the Nazis attack Poland from the west, and a few days later, saw the Russian Soviets attack from the east. It was reported that 2 million were taken from eastern Poland. That's equivalent to all the residents of our city Edmonton and our city Calgary. Only 505,000 ever returned. 2 million were taken, and more than 1,495,000 did not. Their remains rest in mass graves scattered across Siberia and other far northern lands. Hitler outlined what he wanted to do for the Poles who lived in Central and Eastern Europe. It was recorded. Every vestige of Polish culture is to be eliminated. Those Poles who seem to have Nordic appearance will be taken to Germany to work in our factories. That was my mother. Children of Nordic appearance will be taken from their parents and raised as German workers. The rest, they will work. They will eat very little, and in the end, they will die out. There will never again be a Poland. Hitler was wrong, and Stalin too was wrong. It was recorded that temperature on the 10th day of February in 1940 was 40 below. cattle cars, 110 of them, were assembled, each carrying 2,000 women and children, young people, older people, men from eastern Poland, again and again and again and again. This was constantly repeated as empty trains returned only to be filled with more and more human cargo, only to end when the Nazis attacked the Russian Soviets on June 22nd of 1941. So much for the Non-Aggression Pact. Over those 16 months, more than 2 million, as I said, residents of Calgary, residents of Edmonton, were loaded into cattle and freight cars and sent north to Siberia. Only 1 in 4 that was sent survived. Each year, we have come together. There are fewer and fewer of the remaining survivors. Today, Mr. Hortkevich is with us, and I'd ask him to stand, because Bill is one of our survivors of that deportation. Earlier, I referenced the outrageous assault that the murder of Moscow has taken against the good people of Ukraine. Earlier today, I was advised that in only 188 days, the Polish Border Agency reported that the total Ukrainians crossing into Poland is recorded at 5,934,000. That's more than the residents of this province and Saskatchewan combined. 4,130,000 have crossed back into Ukraine, and over 1,500,000 have taken up refuge in Poland. We as Canadians of Polish descent are pleased and honored with the assistance that our families and the government of Poland has provided for the education of the children, the health care for those who need it, and opportunities for them to work, all because of NATO within a safe environment. We all pray that the war will end very soon, and together we can commence with the massive reconstruction that will be necessary. Slava Ukraine. 83 years ago, two madmen decided that they can carve up Europe. They failed. 6 months ago, another madman commenced a special military operation to reestablish the Russian Empire. And I, too, know that he will fail. In concluding, let me say a special thanks to you, Madame Lieutenant Governor, for your comments and special attendance. It's always nice to see you. And thanks to the Speaker, who has kindly again granted us an opportunity to come together here in the People's House to reflect upon the impact of August 23rd, some 83 years ago. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your super staff, who each year have provided outstanding assistance. I want to conclude by reading a very short passage by a book written by one of the survivors of the Russian-Soviet deportation that Stalin ordered. Sadly, Major Schwender passed away earlier this year, but in his book he wrote, "History is important. It reaches across continents, between people, places, and eras. Understanding of the past binds us together and helps us to understand that the future, too, is shared." Thank you very much, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much, John. I would now like to invite Mr. Alexander Danilenko, Consul General of Ukraine in Edmonton, to the podium.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Lieutenant Governor Sam Alakhani, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Ministers, MLAs, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you, everyone, every speakers, for your words of support to Ukraine, to Ukrainian people. And it's not only words. We feel your strong and practical support every day of this war for half a year already. And without your support, we can't stand. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much, Government of Alberta. Thank you very much, all our international friends, especially Polish friends. They opened their country, their homes, and their hearts for us. Thank you. 83 years ago, Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Those totalitarian regimes used this pact as a tool to invade Poland. Other Eastern and Central European countries reshape the European borders and gain control over Europe. Only 2 weeks after the pact was signed, Nazi's armed forces invaded Poland. In another 2 weeks, Soviet army crossed the Polish eastern border. That was the beginning of the World War II. The act caused immense suffering, and the millions of people were murdered, imprisoned, and robbed of their basic human rights. Two dictatorships found common cause in committing crimes against the humanity and imposing terror and destruction on so many nations. Today, on the Black Ribbon Day, we commemorate the victims of communism and Nazism in Europe. 83 years ago has passed in that time. We have learned hard lessons of terrible and deadly consequences of that pact. We still mourn our dear ones, victims of the World War II, victims of the Nazism and Stalinism. But not all of us have learned that lessons, or they just didn't want to learn them. These days, Europe is under the threat again. For some totalitarian leaders, that historical lessons, death and suffering of people means nothing. They continue trying to divide Europe, to draw new borders. They invade sovereign states, annex their territories, kill and torture peaceful people for the sake of their imperial ambitions. It's unbelievable, but in the 21st century we have another dictator in Europe, and his name is Putin. And unfortunately, from now on, when honoring the innocent victims of the bloody totalitarian regimes in Europe, commemorating the Black Ribbon Day, along with Nazism and Stalinism, we will also mention Putinism. According to the United Nations data, Putin's regime has already killed more than 5,500 civilians in Ukraine and injured about 8,000 people. 379 Ukrainian children killed and 735 injured. These are only confirmed figures. The real figures are much, much bigger. According to some estimates, the number of victims only in Mariupol may range from 25,000 to 80,000 people. And it is terrible. Hundreds of people in Ukraine were raped and tortured. These are terrible war crimes, and those who committed them must be brought to justice. For 77 years, since 1945, commemorating millions of victims of the horrible war, we've been saying never again. And now, unfortunately, we have to say it's happening again. Again, in the middle in Europe, the biggest, bloodiest, and most terrible war in Europe since the World War II, just because of one man with a sick mind. The same, and we must stand side by side in the face of the threat. Ukrainians now on the front line of this battle, but they are fighting, sacrificing their lives not only for our country, but they are fighting for the whole Europe, for the stability and security in the world, for the democratic and human values we all share. We are fighting bravely, but we desperately need support. Thus, we ask you to help Ukraine in any possible way you can to help us to defeat this evil for the sake of our common future, for the sake of our children. Let us be united in our struggle for freedom and democracy, so that the horror of wars, the horrors of totalitarian regimes, and the suffering of millions of innocent people will really never happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalenko. Glory to the heroes, Slava Ukraini. It's now my great pleasure to ask Rabbi Ari of Shabbat Edmonton to speak.
Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad we're on a first-name basis. Everyone else, you said their last name. That's okay, I'll take a chance. And I must say, I do admire your black ribbon on top of your white ribbon. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you very much for the honor of being able to address you here today. There's an old expression that goes, if you think what you thought and you say what you said, you will have what you had. As important as it is to gather together year after year to decry tyranny and oppression, we have to ask ourselves, so when is the cycle going to stop? And what can we do to change this terrible cycle? We're taught that darkness can't be brushed away with a broomstick. Rather, you have to light a candle. All of humanity is fortunate that we have a guidebook. We have an instruction manual. It's called the Bible. We call it the Torah. And when God created the very first two people, Adam and Eve, He gave them a code of conduct, which is known as the 7 Noahide laws. I'll soon explain why they're called Noahide. They should have been called Adamite laws. The first one was not to believe in idolatry, the idea of believing in one God, recognizing that there's one creator for all of us. The second one is not to blaspheme against God, not to be disrespectful to people, His creation, those things which are holy and sacred. Not to murder, respect human life. Not to steal, to respect people's property, people's time, etc. Not to perform any acts of immorality, to respect the family unit that God has established in order to build His world. Not to be cruel to animals, to respect God's creations. And last but not least, to establish courts of law to uphold a civil and a just society. These laws were given to Adam and Eve, and it held for a while. But subsequently, generation by generation, it began to slip. And eventually, mankind became idolatrous and very vicious. In 10 generations, till the time of Noah, God said, I had enough. And He destroyed the entire world, literally, with the exception of Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. And when his cruise ship came to a stop, about a year later, God said, I'm going to reread the instruction manual for life. And hence, the same laws that were given to Adam and Eve were once again reiterated to Noah and to his family, which is why they're called Noahide laws. And they apply to every single human being on planet Earth. This is the bedrock of society. The only exception to that rule is a small and select group of people who, in addition to those 7, have another 606, known as the 613 Commandments, and I'm privileged to be one of them. I don't recommend you join, it's a lot of work. If we take these laws and we teach them to our children, to our friends, to our neighbors, we will see a very different world. Someone shared with me a meme that they saw a little while ago after one of the terrible shootings in the United States in one of the schools. And it's of this child talking to God and saying, "God, where were you? Why didn't you protect us?" And God responded, "I wanted to, but you didn't let me in." In many respects, this is the type of situation that we're dealing with around the world. The fundamental difference between idolatry and godliness is idolatry is man's interpretation of how God can fit into his picture. And that's why you'll notice across the board, all dictators, all tyrants have one thing in mind. They want to fix God's mistakes. You see, in their eyes, God made some people, and he made them wrong. He made them the wrong color. He made them the wrong religion. He made them the wrong creed. He made a mistake. So therefore, I'm going to step up to the plate, and I'm going to help God clean up his world. It's the same modus operandi all over again, just different dates, different times, and different megalomaniacs. Godliness is God's interpretation of how mankind fits into his picture. It is these 7 Noahide laws that have kept humanity sane and sound through all the troubles that we've gone through. It's not an accident that Canada has it in its national anthem, "God, keep our land glorious and free." The United States, "In God we trust." In England, "God save the Queen." And in many, many other countries, whether it's the anthem or any other important document, a political leader takes office, puts his hand on the Bible. Why? Why in the Bible? Till today, it's the #1 best-selling book. There's got to be a reason for it. We know what the problems are, but God has also given us direction for the answer. There are many paths to one God. We have different ways of serving him, but so long as we recognize that there is one creator for us all. I once saw a cute t-shirt that said, a little grumpy kid on it, "I know I'm good because God don't make no junk." We are all created in the image of God himself. And God doesn't make any mistakes. Man does. In the creation of a human being, the Talmud tells us there are 3 partners. The parents contribute the body, and God contributes the soul. If we work together as a team, we're going to build a very beautiful world. And so may God grant that we should very speedily merit the promise that is brought down in Isaiah. "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and man will learn war no more." Followed by the promise in Zechariah, "And on that day, God will be one, and his name will be one." And very speedily, we will indeed see not just God keep our land glorious and free, but indeed God keep our world glorious and free, that the coming of the righteous Mashiach speedily in our day, and may we all say Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ari. And I too am glad we're on a first name basis, although I believed that was your name, was just Rabbi Ari. So my apologies to that. I'd now like to invite the first Vice President of the Canadian Polish Congress Alberta Society to provide remarks, Andrzej Makowiecki.
Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, we are meeting today on anniversary of Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the pact that started Second World War. We came together to commemorate the victims of signing this pact, but also to warn and show what the totalitarian system led to. This day, it's intended to make people aware both of the totalitarianism and to remind of the imprint that Stalinism left on the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. The Canadian and European Parliament declared August 23rd a day of remembrance for the victims for Stalinism and Nazism. The European Parliament in 2008 and Parliament of Canada in 2009. The Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was preceded by conclusion of an agreement on trade. Soviet resources were indispensable element in the plan of conquest of the Europe by the Third Reich. Until the end, the Soviet Union fulfilled its trade obligation. The USSR transferred millions of tons of raw materials to the Third Reich, contributing inter alia to strengthening the position of Germany during economic blockade by Great Britain. History repeats itself. Russia, rich in raw materials, sells them to Western European countries to strengthen its army, an army that attacks its neighbors. We cannot draw conclusions from the recent history. That is why it is so important today to recall the effects of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. We must remember about 2 million people sent to inhumane land, Siberia, from which only about 500,000 returned. The pact was a real announcement that the Hitler would start a war, but both the Germany and Soviets were to remain neutral towards each other, though the dictator of the Third Reich secured his freedom of military action without the risk of confrontation with the Red Army. In return, Stalin, during the military involvement of the Germans, could strengthen his own armed forces and at the same time take over new territories. Those mutual benefits for Germany and Soviet Union, the collusion between Hitler and Stalin of August 23, 1939, opened the way for Germany and the Soviet Union to join armed attack on Poland. The partition of Poland became a fact. As a result, Poland was at war with both the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. It was the beginning of the Second World War, a war in which over 60 million people died in just 6 years. Poland lost 22% of its population. On March 5, 1940, at a meeting of Politburo of a party central committee, Wieczysław Mołotow signed a decision to murder 22,467 Polish officers, policemen, settlers, landowners, and intellectuals imprisoned in NKVD camps. In order to preserve the memory of the victims, the evidence of the crime must be documented. Equally important are care for historical truth and the need to judge and bring to the account the communist criminals. In conclusion, I would like to add, arrested in 1945, Ribbentrop was convicted and sentenced to death in Nuremberg trials for his role in starting World War II in Europe and enabling the Holocaust. On October 16, 1946, he became the first of the Nuremberg defendants to be executed by hanging. Wieczysław Mołotow was never tried during his lifetime. In 1953-1956, he was again the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the USSR, died November 8, 1986 in Moscow. We must never forget what totalitarian system lead to. Thank you for your attention.
The President of the Ukrainian Congress Council, Alberta Provincial Council, Arishia Boychuk, will provide remarks on behalf of the Alberta Provincial Council.
Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, elected officials, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Alberta Provincial Council, it is my privilege to bring greetings as we commemorate Black Ribbon Day. We wholeheartedly support the Black Ribbon Day commemorations and have encouraged all to take part in this event. Established through a unanimous resolution of Canada's Parliament in 2009, Black Ribbon Day coincides with the anniversary of the signing of the infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union. Soon after the pact was signed, the two regimes jointly invaded and dismembered Poland, starting World War II. Millions of men, women, and children were murdered, imprisoned, and subjected to dreadful brutality by the Nazi and Soviet regime. In commemorating Black Ribbon Day, we stand with the people of conscience all over the world to ensure that the terrible crimes perpetrated by the Nazi and the Soviet communist regimes are never repeated. Today, as Putin's Russia invades Ukraine, we must recall the lessons of history to ensure that the crimes of Nazism and communism are never repeated by today's tyrannical dictators. Let this National Day of Remembrance be a constant reminder that we respect diversity and value uniqueness as we all work towards equality, justice, citizenship, and a more inclusive society. While we cannot change the past, we must learn from it and ensure that the crimes of the past are not repeated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the President of the Western Canadian Zelkle Society, Mr. Jolt C.K., to bring remarks.
Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, Ministers, MLAs, dear guests. On behalf of all Canadian Hungarians and our Canadian President of the Hungarian Diaspora Council, I bring greetings to all who gathered here to commemorate Black Ribbon Day, the Remembrance Day for the victims of communism and Nazism. Communism and National Socialism is very much part of the history of every Eastern European nation, and that history cannot be forgotten easily, as it left a deep scar in many of us long after the wounds have been healed. Black Ribbon Day commemorations are very important as it brings awareness to the atrocities our nations endured, hoping that mankind would not want to repeat the sufferings. Unfortunately, even as we speak here today, history appears to repeat itself. It looks like we have not learned from our past and our sufferings during the First and Second World Wars and thereafter. It is hard to comprehend that with all the knowledge of our past, we still use bombs, grenades, and weapons to solve conflicts rather than peace talks. we have gathered here to pay tribute to the victims of communism and Nazism, and to remember those who were sent to the gulags or to Auschwitz, soldiers who were treated as war criminals in violation of every known convention at that time, civilians dressed in uniforms, recorded as prisoners of war, men, women, and children taken away purely on the account of their origins. Today, we are here to remember the horror of the past: interrogation rooms, cellars, confessions obtained through torture, the predetermined death sentences, and the long road of concentration camps, the forced marches of deportation, which saw the disappearance of many thousands, sometimes without any traces. Let us remember the decades living under oppression, the enforced silence, the hypocrisy of liberation. Please continue to remind us and warn us that under no circumstances may we take democracy for granted. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank the survivors and their family members to break the silence. The testimonies remain the most important source to uncover the crimes of communism and Nazism. We continuously need to be reminded of the horrors and the atrocities mankind had suffered during these years and still suffering to this date. Sadly, I repeat, it appears that we have not learned from our past. Honor to the brave, glory to the heroes. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joel. We are moving towards the end of our program. We will have the invocation in just a couple of minutes, but prior to doing that, I would like to invite Mr. Erwin Kulet, a member of the Canadian Lithuanian Society of Edmonton, to speak on their behalf.
Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to say a few words on behalf of the Edmonton Lithuanian community. Over the last year, Black Ribbon Friday sadly has gained new relevance. It is a day that we recall the Molotov and Ribbentrop Pact that was joined two totalitarian regimes to conspire to unleash aggression against independent Eastern European states. This aggression created havoc around the globe. Regrettably, authoritarianism and aggression are not relegated to history books. Russia's invasion of the Ukraine looks too similar to Russia's aggression in the past. Today, we Lithuanians stand in solidarity with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters as they defend their independence in the face of aggression of an authoritarian regime. Lithuania has experienced occupation by the Russians, and it has made her a leader within the East European Union and supports Ukraine in its fight. Today, it is actually interesting that aggression continues, and we know that it is also a war for democracy, for representative and transparent governments. That is also our battle. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Reverend Father Thomas, pastor of St. Basil's Ukrainian Catholic Parish, to provide the invocation. That will be immediately followed by a moment of silence. Please rise with me after the invocation to observe that moment of silence.
Your Honor and Mr. Speaker, As a person who was born in Soviet Union in 1977, I clearly remember how I lived this two-fold reality, two realities that never met each other in daily life. On one side, when I listened to my teachers and watched TV, I was proud that I live in the best country in the world, how advanced it is in technically and scientifically. Then I left the school. After the school, I turned off the TV. I went outside to buy things I need. And I remember how many hours I spent with my parents in lines in the front of every store trying to get basic thing like a bottle of milk or proper clothing. Anyway, in 1991, when Soviet Union started to fall apart, it was hard to understand how such a powerful country could disappear so quickly. Later, after reading some books and listening to some eyewitnesses, I came to this conclusion that USSR was nothing else but the evil empire, according to American President Ronald Reagan. Yeah, evil empire. The turning point for me was when the news about mass graves were discovered all over the place, in church basements and forests. For me, it was point of no return. Yeah, indeed, USSR is, not was, and still is the evil empire. For me, it was the time of discovering the truth about total violence that Stalin did against every person who was independent, who was self-sufficient and socially active. I learned about Holodomor, Siberia camps, and again, the mass graves all over the place. So let us pray today to God that these two monsters, and Nazism and communism, will never come again, that will never be forgotten. Let us pray, our Lord Jesus Christ, you came to us in human body in order to redeem us from the evil one through your cross and resurrection. Also, you warned your disciples and through them the whole humankind about false prophets. You said, be aware of false prophets who will come to you in the sheep clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Indeed, Hitler, Lenin, and Stalin were the false prophets. Now we know that their speeches at the beginning were filled with sweet words of justice, peace, progress. However, their deeds were totally different. Now, O Lord, we know that instead of justice, they brought too many people into prisons and camps. Instead of peace, they had constant wars. Instead of progress, these false prophets brought millions of people in mass graves. As we are commemorating the victims of Nazism and communism, we are praying for peace for their souls, that the wounds also of these two ideologies did to people, that these wounds would be healed. But also, dear Lord, we are praying for Ukraine, who is struggling right now against the same monster who is trying to take over our Ukrainian land and is trying to come back. Decades ago, too many people trusted to these false prophets. They followed them, and we pay the price for it. So, dear Lord, give victory to Ukraine in this war, so that every Ukrainian, by living according to your will contribute to the world their best talents. Lord, hear our prayers, because we learned that horrible lesson. In our turn, we will be, as after we come to our homes, we will pass this knowledge to our children. So may Ukraine win, and may these two monsters, Nazism and communism, will never rise again. Amen.
Please be seated. I would like to invite Tatiana Wojcinski. She will be performing the meditation from Thais. Thank you so much, Tatiana. There's something so special about being here together. And I just am so grateful that you were able to be here today to help us think, if only for a moment, about things that we share together. You know, there's so much sorrow, hardship, and sadness that comes along with remembering. But you know, today is an incredible day of hope and opportunity that is before us. It's amazing to think what happened here today when the left and the right, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, all Albertans coming together to the People's House to reflect upon the things that are important to each and every one of us, the freedoms that we share, that we join arms with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters as we look to the oppression that they have been under. And so I want to encourage each and every one of you as we go today, that we take what we share here today back home to our friends and our families, to our communities, that we don't just remember today, but that we remember every day the things that bond us together, the things that make Alberta one of the greatest places to live, work, and raise a family. And the fact that you're here today means that you care about those things. And so from the very bottom of my heart, on behalf of all members of the Legislative Assembly, thank you to each and every one of you who have been on our platform today, who have brought remarks, who have participated in our ceremony, and who each in your own way make Alberta exactly what it is, and that is an incredible place to call home. This does conclude our ceremony today. I would like to invite, immediately following this ceremony, the platform party to join me on the stairs behind for a photo. I would also like to invite Therese and Mr. Zabor to join us for that photo. And please spend a few minutes together socializing and reflecting upon what we share in common. May God bless you, and may God bless Alberta.